I'm from the Warren Buffett school on EBITDA, so it's bullshit money. It doesn't exist. Sometimes the reality, comes home to roost. The company that I was working for was that I'd done probably the largest deal they'd ever done in their history. At that point, my level of remuneration on it compared to input caused me to think I should be doing something perhaps better with my time.
Today, I'm joined for a conversation by Howard Weston. Howard is a founder and partner at a firm called Lucas Weston. He's been helping business owners sell their businesses for the last 25 years. This was a very insightful conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it too. I think as a starting point, it would just be interesting to know a little bit about how you ended up in this profession as a business broker. Obviously, you've had quite a track record. You've been going for, you said yourself, almost 25 years now, which is very impressive. And so I'm just curious, how did that come about?
25 years, yeah, next year is when we'll celebrate it. I fell into this profession by accident. I'm actually a commercial diver by trade, and one of the first businesses I ever had was a commercial diving contracting company, which I sold at a very tender young age, many another lifetime ago. But I did a really bad job of it. Handled everything myself. Wasn't great, but I enjoyed the process. I then went into corporate life and did a few years in the corporate arena, working in advertising. I was advertising director for a magazine publishing company for a while. And then I got the opportunity to work for, I guess, technically probably one of my competitors today. Back in the early days, I was with them for 3 years and, didn't know much about the profession. I kind of just fell into it. Right place, right time. Got on with the chap who ultimately employed me and sort of stumbled my way through it. And, 25 years later, here we are. I'm actually started Lucas Weston 25 years ago. But I've put in another 3 years elsewhere before that.
And in terms of the starting your first brokerage firm and the one that's been going for almost 25 years now. So Lucas and Weston, how did you go about, even just finding the first clients? And was it, again, one of those things where you had clients that knew you already and it was just word of mouth? Or
one of the reasons I left the prior company that I was working for was that I'd done probably the largest deal they'd ever done in their history at that point. And I think it's probably fair to say my level of remuneration on it compared to input caused me to think I should be doing something perhaps better with my time. And that was kind of the catalyst. That particular firm, the owner of that, I got on extremely well with. They didn't think I'd ever manage to sell it, and I did. He was well connected and had lots of friends and contacts. And he sort of said, "Oh, why don't you get off your ass and get on and do it yourself, Howard?" And I said, "Okay, fine." But I was heavily mortgaged at the time, had a young family. And he said, "Okay, look, I've got a friend who wants to meet you." So I started with one client. When I left the prior company, I wasn't allowed to take clients or poach clients or anything like that, and I didn't. So it was effectively a cold start. I got the first client. It's always the hardest thing to do is get your first client, and we were kind of gifted one. And then we slowly built from there. But it wasn't as competitive in those days as it is today. There's still some of the same faces and names around today as there was back then, but it was a different landscape. And it was literally just putting your head down, getting on with it, networking, meeting people. If you've been in the business a long time, or you've been and you meet people. Those contacts know other contacts, and slowly you build from there. It's no more secretive than that. Just a lot of hard graft at the start, and just getting on with it, really.
Everyone I speak to, and who's had years of experience in this industry, it's funny that most of the people, they're the people who have also been entrepreneurs themselves and tried selling businesses, sell successfully, some more, some less successfully. And so when you mentioned that your experience as well, how obviously the first time you do it, most business owners also go through this process once in their lifetime. They don't do this day in, day out. And so I don't know if you mind, maybe just showcasing some examples of what you feel like, you would have done differently, maybe if you had to do the same thing today.
Pretty much everything. It was a classic case that I was approached I'd done well. I built a decent business. It was growing. It was fairly stable. It was good. And I got approached, as many companies get approached. I'm sure you hear that a lot. I was flattered and thought, oh, wow, great. Look, I've started something from not much, built it up. Great. I was having fun. I was quite young in those days, or a lot younger in those days. And I was just flattered. I thought, okay, well, let's see where this goes. And so, I didn't enter into any non-disclosure agreements. Handed them over the account, said, "Look, this is what it is." I was fairly fearless in those days, to be honest. It was just a case of, oh, well, let's I didn't have really anything to lose. It was just speculative. They'd approached me, and I got too friendly with them too quickly. They learned out probably a bit too much about the operation, how it was. I gave away probably too much information too quickly. And they were seasoned operators. They acquired and bought other companies. They knew what they were doing. It's in a contracting business, so they were contractors as well, which they're always tough to negotiate with. And they took advantage of my naivety. And it's only with hindsight I can say that now, because I do it for a living and I have done for the last 25 years, and I've advised on over 270 deals. So you learn a bit along the way. But at the time, I did so many things wrong just because I was kind of flattered. My ego was inflated by somebody coming along saying, "Oh, we like what you do. Yeah, we want to give you some money," and I went with it.
In terms of how you would go about it now. So one of the conversations that we had on this podcast was with someone, with Rishi, actually, from the law firm that we work with closely, and he's mentioned, like, the legal aspects of it. There's only so much you can do in terms of safeguarding yourself. So would you say it's more about just how much you disclose, just from the practical standpoint, when the buyer wants to know more about your operations, and sort of just taking it one step at a time and building the trust? Or what would you say is the best approach?
I'm going to be slightly biased with my answer because I'm a corporate advisor, and this is where having a corporate advisor really comes into play. Usually, and definitely in my case, I should have just handed over the reins to somebody else to do it. But I was curious and what have you, and I did, and I thought I knew it all as well. So I just went into it pretty headstrong. But a good advisor, the key to any deal, really, Boris, is finding the right fit. What works for you, what works for them, and finding a solution that meets both parties' expectations. And there's a bit of horse trading, a bit of compromise needed on both parts to get there. It's very rarely a one horse race where you just go, right, I'm going to have it all my own way, start to finish. It doesn't really work like that, and the best deals rarely ever go that way. and it's worth spending the time. Kissing some frogs. You're going to meet some lemons. You're going to meet some nice people. You're going to meet some fantasists and dreamers, and you've got to have a range of people when you're going through this process to find the actual right fit. And you'll know it. You'll know it when you feel it, when you meet them and you see it. I don't want to get all hippie trippy about it, but there's a vibe and a momentum, and you'll feel it. So I'd say probably 80-90% of the deals that we advise on today, we know pretty much after the first meeting whether they're the right fit, the right buyer, whether there's rapport there, whether it's going to fit. And conversely, very, very quickly when it's not going to work. So I've been in meetings where you sit down and on paper there's it looks the best fit in the world. There's synergies, economies of scale flying off the pages, and everything that works. But then you put the two MDs in a room, and within 5 minutes you're under the table going, what the hell have I done? You've introduced two people, you're talking about the football and the weather because there's a class that's just not going to get on. And that happens, and it's about marrying those things together. And I think it's the human angle which gets forgotten in M&A, especially in SME M&A, where it's a lot more emotive. As a vendor, it's their money, it's their livelihood, it's their, it's a lot more emotive. And I think a lot of people, underestimate that side of the process. And lawyers 10 a penny, accountants 10 a penny. You can find people who can do all that thing, all that stuff, and that analyzing spreadsheets and cash flows and accounts and going through all the legal bits and pieces. There are a ton of advisors out there who can do that. Finding people who can actually mold a deal around circumstance and picking the right partners and people to work with, that's kind of tricky, and that's fortunately it's something we've proven quite good at for the last 25 years. We virtually do no marketing. All our work comes pretty much from word of mouth, and that's just because we've been around a long time. And if you do good work, people gravitate towards it, and you can build your business that way, and that's kind of what we've done.
One of the questions that I had that just came up was when you talk to the buyer and you feel like on a personal level, not between yourself and them, but the seller and the buyer, it's not quite a fit. Would you then go down the route of telling the seller, look, like I don't think this is right, or would you still try to make it work, even though look, sometimes people don't get on, but they do business together, right? So
that's a great question. It very much depends. I mean, we're I don't handle a great volume of clients, so I'll handle maybe 5 to 10 clients a year, and that is it. And that is it. So we're not about volume, but we do get quite involved throughout the process. So it's not a case of we're not like a listing type. We get very heavily involved from start to finish, all the way through. And there are some clients you like more than others, but ultimately you're there to do a job. So somebody's, you don't have to. I say to client, look, you don't have to like me. You don't, if you don't, that's fine. There's some people I can't work with, and others that I can. And some, you're not going to get on with everyone. It's just a fact of life. But it's how you approach your job and how you approach what you do, and I think that's very important. And brokers get a lot of grief on socials and LinkedIn, and they get it. A lot of bad things are said about it, and there's good and bad in every profession. But the key thing is it's about integrity. It's who you work with and what you stand for. So I've always said, look, there's no point. I don't want to work with somebody if they've got unrealistic expectations of what the process is. And you've got to remember, when you're a first time buyer, you don't know what you don't know. Seller, you don't know what you don't know. And certain types of people, information's quick to find on the internet these days. They'll do a quick search, they'll find the answers to what they want to know, and they think that's it. And it's it looks easy, and it can be a bit of a fool's errand going down that road, self-education. Trust me, I've been there and I've done it myself. and it's a lot easier to get good advice and get the right people in, and that just comes down to sitting down with people and just being honest and upfront about what your ambitions are, what your expectations are, what you want to get out of it. And we reject probably 70-80% of the stuff that comes to us just simply because it's not going to work. We don't, we can't see how their business is going to fit for what they want to achieve. And we'll say to clients, go away, come back when you've sorted out this, sort these things out. There's this, there's a succession issue, there's a secondary management issue, there's, client concentration issues. And we'll just give people, advice and say, look, you're not ready. A lot of people, especially in the SME space, will sort of have what I call the Friday afternoon knee-jerk reaction. They've had a bad day to a bad week, payroll's coming up, and they just said, let's get out of this. And in the olden days, we used to get phone calls on a Friday afternoon with people exactly in that position. And we just say, look, go through the weekend, relax, give it some thought. These are the things you should be looking at. And it's getting that straight advice. And that's what's difficult, because of the way our industry is structured, as you'll know. Anyone can become a corporate advisor. Anyone can put up a plaque on their door and say they give advice and build a fancy website and picture of Canary Wharf in the background in an office in Dubai and talk the talk. But very, very few, and I say this 25 years still standing, very, very few actually do deliver in the SME environment. It's not easy. Lots of people massively underestimate what it takes to actually sell a small company. And my advice to anybody is get a good, honest opinion. But they are hard to come by.
What do you do if a seller comes to you and they say, "Look, I have a friend John. He ran a little nice e-com store. He sold it sold it on for 7 figures. Listed it on the website online, and that was it. Why can't I do the same?" What do you say to them?
I'd say it's not for me. I would say, look, it all comes down to certain things. What's real? What can you deliver? So there are certain things. So for example, I don't give tax advice. I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not a solicitor, so I don't give legal advice. I'm not a dentist, so I don't take your teeth out. It's what play to your strengths. What are you good at? Where can you add value to somebody? Where can you and what do they ultimately want to do? Because most people come to you, they're not going to say, look, I'm having a tough time in life. I can't take things anymore. The stress is too much. I just want out. You sometimes don't ever get to know the truth on what's driving a sale and what's behind it. And you have to try to read between the lines sometimes. And I think it's knowing what somebody actually wants, reading those signals and marrying it up with what's possible in the marketplace. And that's really the skill of doing it. Everyone always says, and I get this a lot, saying, "Oh, look, Howard, why are you charging so much when I've got 2-3 people I think you should sell to, I could sell to, why should I involve you?" And I said, great, well, look, talk to them, see how you get on, and then come back to us. It's about understanding where the value is created and what people do, and you either get it or you don't. And a lot of first-time buyers look to cut corners and think, okay, well, look, this looks expensive, and then they'll find out what expensive truly is when they do it the wrong way. And some people get lucky, so everyone's got a mate down the pub who knows somebody who sold to Bill Gates, Elon Musk, whoever, who $1 billion unicorn from out the bedroom, and that's great. But real life don't work like that. Not for most of us anyway.
Yeah, there is still, to this day, obviously you've been in business for 25 years, but there's still that lack of education, simply because a lot of people just don't look in the first place because they don't know how the process works, and it's not something that's on your mind every day because you're there just building a business. That's the goal. You want to build a business, and then once the time comes to exit, then you realize that you should start the work a little bit earlier before you put the business on the market, right?
It's all part of that preparation. It might look a cost to get good advice and get things done early on, but you will receive the benefit of that tenfold through a proper sale process run properly. And so I always get, when somebody's first question to me is, "What are your fees?" Again, it's that I'm probably not the right broker for them, because they're looking for, they're just commoditizing what I do. And it's the same thing when somebody asked me the first question about a business. I said, "Oh, how much do they want for it?" Straight away, red flag. It's like, what are you interested in? Now, sometimes people want to cut to the chase and just see if they can afford it or if it's in the right ballpark or what have you, and that's fine. But not 9 times out of 10, if they're buying on price, or price is the first thing in their mind, they're probably not the right buyer for the business. Simply because the first questions I would be asking if I was genuinely interested in buying somebody's company is that, how long have you been in business? What's your customer concentration like? What's your, who else in your team's important? Who's your key staff? Who are your key supply? And you find out a bit more about that. The profit takes care of itself. If you get all that other stuff right, the bottom line and the profit takes care of itself, and it's easy to work out where things are. Mm-hmm. So I always get nervous when people ask me about money straight away, whether it's what are your fees or versus what is the price, because it's usually not. It's not. I can't even think of one occasion where that's happened which has led to a sale.
I'm just curious. You mentioned this, like 70-80% of sellers who come to you, you might turn down just because it's not the right fit. does that apply? Does the same figure apply to buyers as well? Would you say that's how many buyers like you potentially turn
It's
away, or do
it's
you work differently?
it's it's more, again, it's circumstantial. So we'll have certain sectors we do things in. We know a lot of people in those space. We know who the buyers are. We've done multiple deals in those sectors. So, for example, document archive, record management services. I've probably sold more companies in that space than anyone in the country. It's not deliberate. It was just a niche we fell into, and we're quite good at it. I've got 3 of them going on as we speak. That's great. We're not specialists, but we do get involved in certain industries because we know it well, and it's great. So I'll look at every opportunity and think, okay, who could want to buy this, and where's the fit? Why would somebody want to buy it? And 99 times out of 100, it's going to be more than, because it makes £500,000 profit a year, or what have you. It's other things. You're looking for buyers, whether they're first time buyers or not, who can lead. They've got a skill set. So sort of acqui-hires, which sounds great and flash. Not too many of them get done in the sort of small arena, but they do happen. And by acqui-hire, I mean buying to acquire staff or skills or people. So acquiring for that reason. Most first-time buyers underestimate the process of what's involved. So they may have been involved in M&A from a corporate background, so they've perhaps done M&A in a big company and what have you. It's very different when it suddenly becomes your money. You're writing the check, you're underwriting, you're taking on the liabilities and taking on the staff and taking on the lease, and all the stuff that goes with buying a company. It's very different. So I'd say to people, if you're starting out, start by something smaller and look to grow from there. And then when you've run and operated a business at a smaller level, you can then look at getting bigger and possibly acquiring something else. And then, the bigger, grander plans that people talk a lot about can start to come to be. I think if people try to jump in too soon, too big, and unless you've got a lot of money, it's very easy to become a cropper, and you can lose a lot of money very quickly by just rushing. And I kind of have some concerns about the accountancy space at the moment. There's so many accountancy practices being hoovered up from the top to the bottom. And it just makes me nervous when I see that happening in industries. History and precedent tells you from times before that it doesn't. When an industry moves too quickly, too fast, there comes a point where everything catches up with things, and it can be a problem. And I've seen it in several industries over the years. Accountancy is just one that's du jour. Vet as another one. Veterinary practices getting hoovered up. That was very du jour, a couple of years ago. Had it seen it itself with records management companies, that was a lot of consolidation going on. It's now quite a different industry to what it was, and it's just trends, Boris. Things come into to fashion. Everyone wants the new shiny thing, and they chase after it.
Yeah. When you say it leads to problems, what sort of problems are you referring to?
People buy. So, for example, a lot of companies, overexpand, and they grow too quickly. So, if you raise a lot of money, your brief is to go out and grow and get big. Sometimes you can do that without perhaps the due care and attention that you might have if you were taking your time. So there's certain models of business and certain ways people do business. And I'm talking generally here, so I'm not specifically. But there are examples you can point to where you could say, "Oh, hang on a minute, this industry is consolidating too quickly," and so you'd have to query the quality of what's being bought and when that will come home to roost. Because at some point, if you go too quickly, you don't embed. Because bear in mind, in embedding a company and growing is a big part of M&A, which people ignore. Everyone likes the sexy stuff and acquiring and the negotiation and the stuff, but the actual onboarding it, building a culture, transferring that culture, and the back end officey stuff, that a lot of people forget, and they don't realise that integration is vital, and that's where most M&A stuff goes wrong, because what people have thought they've bought isn't actually what they've actually bought, and then they obviously have problems embedding it. And I think if companies grow too quickly via acquisition doing that, it creates problems further down the line.
When it comes to big consolidations, private equity are often the biggest drivers of that. Do you find that it's different generally when you work with clients who could potentially sell to private equity firms versus where you're talking to a trade buyer, for example?
Good question. Private equities, I could bore you to death about private equity, and I'm pretty sure everyone's got an opinion on it. Very few SME companies are really geared up for private equity. So private equity really doesn't kick in till sort of enterprise values of sort of £5 million plus. So stuff less than that. Okay, there's going to be outliers and some sort of bolt-on opportunities, but the way private equity works, it costs a lot of money and time and effort to buy a business. You might as well buy something big, right? And most SMEs like the idea of it because someone comes along, they offer a big lump of money, you get to go away and do what you think you want to do. Very, very few SMEs are geared up for it. They don't understand the model and what's involved and how private equity works. And again, it's imperative that you do get advisor. Private equity like to work with advisors as well, because they can get round that sort of naivety learning curve. They know somebody's going to get the proper advice and they can get things done. But in my experience, and I've sold to several private equity companies over the years, it has to be very, very well aligned with what they're doing with something bigger further up the food chain. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. Most SME stuff, it's a bit of a pipe dream. They're not geared up for it unless you've got, massive growth potential. You're prepared to stick around to deliver it. So most vendors that we get involved with are looking to either retire or move on to something else. But if you don't have things like secondary management teams in place, if your management accounting isn't in place, there's no hiding place. So private equity is a tough place to go to try and get a sale if you're not either well advised or very, very well prepared. And I've taken clients, back in the day to private equity, and we've just had our asses kicked because we just weren't ready, we weren't prepared, things weren't in the right place, and that begins with the vendor. The vendor's got to know what he's letting himself in for, what's going to get asked of him. A lot of vendors aren't ready for it. They're not prepared for it. They don't know what's coming. And, they've run their businesses. Oh, well, what do I need management accounts for? I know what's in the bank. We're in the black. We're not overdrawn. I take my dividends every month. You'd be surprised how many big companies still operate that way. And then when it comes to raising money or, the information dump and load that's required to get that money is a tall order. It's tough. And many people fall at that hurdle, and it's not for the faint-hearted. It can be an awful lot of work, and ultimately someone somewhere in an office you don't meet is making a decision. He doesn't like the color of your logo and decides he doesn't want to invest, and you don't get the money, and you've spent thousands and thousands getting to a position, and that's just the way it is. Private equity is a tough game. It's a big boys game. It's not for everyone. A very, very few SME businesses kind of fall within that remit, to be frank.
Do you think it's a dream because there's this impression that private equity firms are going to pay a higher multiple?
It sounds great because private equity, it's all about growth. So they're buying into an opportunity to take it. It's just plain and simple arbitrage. So private equity comes along, they say, right, if I buy your company for 3-4 times profit, I amalgamate it with something else, build my little platform and bits around it. My arbitrage on that, I can sell it for 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 20, whatever, plus out the back end to somebody further up the food chain. That bit in the middle is mine. That's my profit. That's where I make my money. And everything, again, it looks great and everyone thinks, oh, that's easy. Who wouldn't want to buy something for £3 and sell it for 10 and pocket the difference? And technically anyone can go out and do that. But the reality is it's actually pretty tough. I think with private equity, a lot of the low-hanging fruit, so for example, the fire and security space, a lot of consolidation has been going on in that for the last 5-6 years. I've been involved in some of it. A lot of private equity investment there. And a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So the easy deals, the big stuff is gone. It's now getting harder and harder. And a lot of the private equity companies, and I must probably talk to several hundred on a fairly regular basis over the course of a year, we've noticed that, they're coming further down market because the bigger stuff's all been had. And the easy stuff's been had, and it's getting harder and harder to do deal. And also business owners are getting more savvy. But it's a great story, isn't it? You think somebody's going to come along, buy your business for a huge multiple and make you rich, and off you go because you've done a great job. And when that happens, great. I had a client in the software space who literally started a business 5 years, knew exactly what he was doing, built it. It was built to sell. Textbook from start to finish, sold to PE, moved on to the next thing. And it had a 5-year plan. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm building. Specifically went away and did it, and we achieved it for him. It can be done, but it really isn't easy. And I think that's the message I'd say. As with most things in M&A, it can look easy, and you only ever read about the success story. So sometimes deals go horribly wrong, and frankly, that's in my business. That's what you learn from. I've learned more from the ones that went wrong than any of the ones that went right.
Why do they mostly go wrong? Would you say is there a main reason?
I think people get into the process and they underestimate it, and so they get overwhelmed. And I think it's very easy to be swayed along in the momentum of a deal, and you start making decisions for the wrong reasons, or you're doing things for the wrong reasons, but because you feel trapped, or you're in a process. It can be very addictive. Being in the middle of a deal, it's if you've got lots of people showing interest in your business, it's a very flattering process. If lots of people are nice about it and say, and I've been involved in businesses where you've had people falling over themselves to buy. To buy it and throw money at you and buy, you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, and it can be a great place to be. But it can also be like any intoxicant, it can run away with you, and you can start making bad decisions, poor choices, and I think that's where a lot of people can shoot themselves in the foot in the process. And not only that, it's recognizing when the bubble's going to burst, or when the momentum's going to come out of a deal, and every deal has it. And probably the biggest amount of time I spend on deals is keeping that momentum moving, keeping the wheels. It's very easy for the wheels to fall off a sale, and if you're not prepared and you don't have all your ducks lined up in a row for what's coming, it's very easy for you to lose momentum. Buyers can get bored, they can get scared off. They can find other things to buy. Once you get going, you've got to know where you're going and keep it on track. And that's why a decent advisor, that's really where they earn their money, is keeping the deal together, keeping it on track, and making sure the right things are done at the right time. To guide it through to completion. And that's where a lot of things can go wrong, because you're like a rabbit in the headlights, or you're not prepared, or your advisor doesn't know what he's doing. It's all kinds of things can go wrong. Most of them are to do with the owners of businesses. It's the vendor in their own head. They have to have a mindset where they want to do something, and that's again comes down to client selection. So I'll carefully vet a lot of our clients first, just to see what it is they really, really want to do. Because if they're just a bit bored, and they're running the business nice, and they make they've got all the toys and the fancy cars and the second homes and the holidays, and the kids have gone through university and all that palaver, Are they selling for the right reason? So I get nervous when it's the sort of 35-year-old who's making £500,000 a year, fast growing business, who suddenly says, "All right, I want to get out after 4 or 5 years." You think, well, hang on a minute, you've why? What's driving this? And I think a lot of people just get bored and they want the process is, like I said, it can be quite intoxicating. It can be, you get a lot of attention. People are interested, and if you're not in the right frame of mind about what you're trying to do, it can create problems.
Do you find that once you've vetted the business owner, you decided I'm going to take them on board? Is there an average duration how long it takes to actually sell the business in the UK?
Oh, good question. Quickest I've ever done it is 3 weeks,
Oh,
start
wow.
to finish. Yeah,
Very quick.
but that's once in 25 years, and literally the stars were aligned. So that's not the norm, by any
Everyone
stretch
just
of the
got very
imagination.
excited when you said that.
Yeah, no, it's not. But it can be done. I mean, it's how banks get nationalised in a weekend. It's how you put enough lawyers in a room with some pizzas and make them work 24/7. You can make things happen pretty quick. Realistically, on it, pretty much all of our projects, and I can only speak for myself. I don't know about other firms, but one of the things that I hear an awful lot is people say, "Oh, it'll take a year, 2 years to sell your business." It probably takes a year or two to prepare your business for sale. The actual selling part of your business can be very quick and should pretty much be pretty quick. Realistically, within 60 to 90 days of us taking a project to market, we should have identified the buyer and be talking to the buyer in that timescale. What can drag on is obviously the bigger the buyer is, sometimes you've got to wait till it gets on a board approval. The board only meets once a quarter and you have to wait for something to happen. But getting to an interest in an indicative offer stage, realistically 60 to 90 days, possibly a bit longer. And then obviously once you've agreed an eventual deal, you're into the realm of the lawyers. 10 years ago, it used to take 3 months to complete a deal legally from sort of start to finish for an average sort of, £1 million plus deal. Now it's taking 4 or 5 months, maybe longer. So, for example, we had a deal last year, which we agreed in March last year, and we actually agreed the deal. So signed heads of terms, put it in the hands of solicitors. It didn't complete till last month. So that's well over a year in legal process, and there's all kinds of things that can come up and throw spanners in the works, and it's. You've got to be sort of half have the patience of a saint and half have the tenacity to keep at it and keep pushing in the right direction. But realistically, start to finish, a deal for us is typically 7-8 months from sort of being engaged to getting it done. And I will caveat this because I'm sure some people will come back and say, "Well, that's a load of rubbish. He's talking nonsense." If the business is properly prepared and ready to go and has its stuff prepped in the background, because the market will react. It's the same way if you see a great opportunity for a house or something on your street and it's for sale and you like the look of it, you will react to that opportunity and you'll do something. And if your timing is right and you're in the right sector and you've done the right stuff and your business is attractive, the market won't hang around. You'll gain interest and people will be interested in wanting to buy you, and you can agree a deal. The problem is most people who want to sell aren't ready to sell and don't have something to sell, so the business isn't really sellable. And I think that's a lot of the problem. So a lot of people go to market with goods that aren't really ready for market, if that makes sense. So if the asset isn't prepared and isn't ready and isn't shiny, you're not going to attract the people for it. And I think that's the problem with M&A, with a lot of companies that have gone to market. It's knee-jerk reaction stuff. They've not prepared. They're not really ready. They don't know what the process is. And that's why the success rate for a lot of advisors is, quoted at, 1 in 10, 1 in 2 in 20, whatever it is. because our experience is the other way around, because we're taking what, good opportunities that we know are going to be exciting to the market. Our success rate is the other way around. So we're selling 8, 9 out of 10 simply because we're being selective about what we take on, and I think that's the difference.
With the negotiation process where you are sitting across from the buyer, the asset, the business is good. Do you find sometimes that you have to also fight the owner a little bit through the process where you can say, look, we need to be a bit patient because the terms, yes, they're good, but this isn't the deal that we should be going for. We could be, it could be a lot better. And of course, like you said, patience plays a big part there, doesn't it?
If you want to get into business broking, corporate advising, M&A, bags of patience is what you need. It's not something I was naturally endowed with. I'm not the most patient person, but I've learned to be. Doing this business, patience is absolutely key. Yes, you do have internal struggles with your clients. Sometimes they don't want to see things the way things are. But again, if you pick the right client who understands, you can mitigate most of those problems. Problems occur when people's expectations don't meet the reality of the marketplace. And that's where you sometimes the reality comes home to roost, and you have to have words with people to say, look, this is where you're at, this is why you're here. But again, client selection, we don't get too many of those. I mean, obviously you can inherit them, and things change. I mean, the beautiful thing about M&A and why I love it, Boris, and why I've been in it for so long and don't want to really do anything else, it's simply because of the fluid nature of it. It changes. No one deal's the same. So I've done deals, multiple deals in a sector, and all the buyers are different, all the vendors are different, and it's that mix of characters and people that makes it endlessly fascinating. It also makes it incredibly complicated, and you've got to juggle. So you're playing sort of 4D chess. I don't want to over dramatize, but you're sort of playing 4D chess all the time with all these very movable variables all the time. And it's fun. It's interesting. But of course, you just got to try and rig the game in your favour, and I do that by client selection. So I like to work with people who I know are going to be receptive to the marketplace. They're going to be adapted. They're going to see what's going on. And adapt to it, because sometimes in fluid moving markets you have to be. And one of the things I always say to a client when I first take them on is just be open-minded. What you think you want as an outcome might not be there. You might do something else along the way. Something else might happen. A great example is I had a records management company which I was going to sell to a big American corporate, and about a week before the deal was due to close, 2 planes flew into World Trade Center, and I remember coming into work that morning. First call was going to be to this to my client, and then the second call once the time clock had caught up was going to be to New York to say, right, where are we at? Where the lawyers meeting? When's the deal going to take place? 2 planes flew into World Trade Center. The world changed overnight. Deal didn't happen. Look at COVID. Look at we had half a dozen deals on the go. COVID turned up 1 week. I was on holiday, waiting to come home to be told lots of deals had happened. Next thing I was locked in my house for six months. Things change, and this is again where the momentum's important. If you don't ride your, if you don't take your chance when it's there and do the things that it can be a tough place to be.
One question that I did have was, so when it comes to valuations of businesses, people talk a lot about the EBITDA multiples, right? And there's a big debate in the M&A community, what do you apply? How do you apply? Do you apply those at all? Are they relevant? Where do you sit in that debate?
I'm from the Warren Buffett school on EBITDA, so I'm, it's bullshit money. It doesn't exist. I always use pre-tax profit as the multiple. EBITDA has its place. It doesn't really apply. Most people, most advisors, most owners in the SME space, so sub £5 million value stuff, don't really understand how it works and what's involved in it. And it just sounds sexy to say, yeah, my EBIT does, 5x, and we're doing this, and it's dead easy to talk it up. Very few people understand it, and use it and apply it properly. It has its place in certain industries, so heavily asset businesses, you can make a case for using it. But I prefer, I'd look at operating cash flows, and profitability. So EBITDA, I always get nervous when I look at EBITDA, because it's just a very obvious, easy way to try and bump up the numbers. And most people don't use it properly. That's the thing. That's why it gets a bad rap. It's most people don't understand it. They don't really know how it works. I've not yet really seen a really good definitive answers to when it should be applied and when it shouldn't. It's like all things in M&A. It's circumstantial. Some industries swear by it and use it for everything. Others don't. I think there are better metrics, and it tends to over commodify everything. So everyone just looks at multiples, and you can't really compare two businesses if they're not exactly the same, which most businesses aren't, even in the same sectors. You're applying why is one multiple 3 times the EBITDA when one's 7 times the EBITDA, and it tends to over commodify it, and I think it's also lazy. In my opinion, it's only my opinion. It's so much is circumstantial, and this is what I see a lot of on LinkedIn, with people getting into heated debates about stuff, and you've got gurus on the one hand saying, oh, it should be this, or it should be that, or it's this, or what have you, and so much of M&A is about finding your way. It's the collaborations. It's nothing's really black and white. It's circumstantial. It comes down to the right people in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And if you can find a meeting of minds, I don't want to sound too hippie trippy about it, but it's more about that than it is. But I think people can just multiples are easy to hang on to. It's an easy way to commodify things, and they have their point. They have their place, and I'd be a hypocrite if I said I haven't used them and I don't use them on certain things. But it's knowing how to apply it and when to apply it, I think, is the key.
Would you say it's about the pre-tax profits multiple then, as opposed to EBITDA multiple, as a baseline that you start at?
Yeah, I prefer using that, just because it's a lot clearer, and you take away. I mean, the biggest problem is for smaller companies in the SME space is the level of financial naivety or level of sophisticatedness, and I think a lot of people don't understand. So one of the biggest problems, not so much now, because I tend to deal with bigger deals these days, but in the early days, I was always having battles with people who couldn't differentiate the company's cash from their own personal cash. So, when you understand the concept of a company being its own, legal entity, and it owning cash, versus an owner saying, "Well, it's my cash in the bank," and no, you get tired having those conversations where you have to explain, look, working capital. Working capital to a lot of small business owners, they don't understand that concept. As well, look, why do I need to leave working capital behind? It's my cash. It's mine. I'm having it. It's the sophistication, and this is why a lot of bigger buyers, incidentally, like working with advisors, because they know a decent advisor will be able to iron these things out of the way so that they're not deal breakers and problems. So it's dead easy to sign a heads of terms, get into a deal, get into the legals on it, and then you suddenly go, hang on a minute, I'm not getting what I think I'm getting. Yeah. How did this happen? And you see that a lot.
My last question today is more of a generic one, but from where you sit, where do you see the UK M&A industry moving at the moment? Let's say if you had to make some kind of prediction for the next 5 years or so.
More and more people are piling into the space. Cryptocurrency, buy to let have all been, get rich quick investment schemes. I think M&A, SME level M&A is having a bit of its turn in the sun for that. I think eventually I mean, the cream rises to the top. If you're only good at what you do, you'll be around. You'll find work. There's work for everyone. The AI stuff taking over the world, it doesn't really particularly bother me. I think it's a useful tool. We use it, some of the applications in our own firm, and it has a place. It's not going to replace, and it can't ever replace the human element of a deal. So I'm not worried about that. It will come in more into play. So in terms of sort of deal origination, and finding buyers, there's some useful tools out there that I think are just going to get better, and that side of M&A is going to get easier. The legal side of it, there's some very good M&A legal platforms, in the AI, in using AI, which is good. So I think the standard's going to improve slowly, and I think because of the access to information, slowly, financial literacy for business owners will improve as well. What I think will also happen is a lot of people will fall by the wayside, in that, the get rich quick. M&A isn't a quick way to make lots of money. It's, unless you're very lucky consistently, it's not a place to go and make big bucks quickly. Yes, you can make money. Yes, it's fun, and yes, it's enjoyable. But I think the one thing it isn't is quick. Not if you do it properly and you want to stick around, and if it's about longevity, which is the name of the game, in my book, you should build for the future. So I think it's interesting times. What a time to be alive. The tool, I remember when I first started, I used to go to the Central Library, and I used to go through Yellow Pages to find companies. So my local library had the whole country's Yellow Pages in a reference section, and I used to just go through there. There was no internet. We didn't have email. We used to send NDAs by fax, believe it or not, back in those days. And I used to go and do prospecting and stuff. We used to have for some people who perhaps my sort of age plus, they'll remember things like the Compass directories, global books, big thick telephone directories full of companies making all kinds of strange things. I used to live and when I first started, that's what I just spent a lot of time doing. And we've got such wonderful tools now that databases that you can access, and platforms like your own business sale report. There's so much information out there. It's never been easier to do some parts of the job, and I think that's great. And I think it's great more people are trying to do it and wanting to be entrepreneurial. But I just want to reiterate again, it's not an easy, quick thing. Quick and easy is just not what M&A is about. It's but there's some great tools, and I think we're in exciting times. That's what I think.
Great, thank you, Howard.